On the night of September 25, 2025, under the lights of a packed arena in Chicago, Keith Urban stepped to the microphone and began performing a song he had written years earlier for his wife. But something was different. As the melody unfolded, listeners realized the lyrics had been altered. A different woman's name replaced the one fans knew by heart. 5 days later, divorce papers were filed, ending a marriage that had lasted nearly 19 years. Their daughters, just 17 and 14, were suddenly caught in the quiet aftermath. To the public, it seemed abrupt. But the fracture had begun long before that night, years earlier, when Keith started living in a separate house, trying to keep a life together that was already slipping apart. What followed wasn't just a breakup, but a reckoning that sent shockwaves through country music. And to understand how it all unraveled, the story has to go back much further, long before the fame, the tours, and the headlines. Keith Lionel Urban was born on October 26, 1967, in Whangarei, New Zealand. His father, Bob Urban, ran a modest fabric shop. His mother, Marianne, carried Danish heritage, and buried within that lineage was an overlooked echo of what was to come. Her grandfather had once been a street musician in Copenhagen, a man who died penniless, his talent leaving little trace behind. At the time, no one thought much of it. When Keith was just 2 years old, the family relocated to Caboolture, a small town in Queensland, Australia, with fewer than 8,000 residents. There was no country radio, no local music circuit, no visible path toward the world Keith would one day inhabit. In 1971, during long 14-hour drives across the outback, Bob bought his son a ukulele for $12 Australian, an attempt to quiet a restless child in the back seat. That small purchase, made without expectation, would quietly alter the family's future. 2 years later, when Keith was 6, Bob reluctantly agreed to buy a second-hand Yamaha guitar from a Brisbane pawn shop for $50. It was meant to be temporary, a passing curiosity. Instead, Keith immersed himself completely. He practiced 6 to 8 hours a day. Within weeks, neighbors complained about the noise. By the age of 8, he was wearing through 3 full sets of strings each month. His fingertips became so calloused that a teacher once suspected something was wrong at home. The commitment came at a cost. The family cut their grocery spending by nearly a third. Marianne began cleaning office buildings at night to help pay for lessons and equipment. Keith memorized more than 200 country songs before his 10th birthday. His first instructor, John Edney, charged $3 per lesson but often waived the fee, later saying Keith was the most naturally gifted student he had taught in 25 years. Between 1975 and 1980, Keith's parents drove him more than 52,000 kilometers across Queensland, ferrying him to talent contests, club stages, and barrooms, enough distance to circle the globe. To save money, they slept in the car. In 1978, Marianne sold her engagement ring for $180 so Keith could buy a guitar amplifier. At just 8 years old, he won $25 at the Tamworth Junior Country Music Festival. The prize money went directly toward groceries. By 10, Keith was performing 4 nights every weekend, earning between $15 and $30 per show, sometimes more than his father made. He missed 47 days of school in a single year. Education officials warned the family of legal consequences, but the bookings didn't stop. He began skipping school altogether to busk on Brisbane's Queen Street Mall, earning up to $40 a day. His parents only discovered it after a call from the school. Bob grounded him for 3 months and confiscated his guitar. Keith adapted, practicing finger positions silently on a tennis racket. Soon after, a local newspaper ran a photograph of him performing on the street, labeling him a 10-year-old country prodigy. The exposure landed him a paid gig worth $75. From that point forward, it was clear music wasn't leaving his life. In 1980, at the age of 12, Keith dropped out of Bundaberg High School, a decision that infuriated his father. By 13, he had joined a local band called The Kids as their lead guitarist. They played rough Queensland pubs filled with drunk, unpredictable crowds. Keith earned $200 a weekend, the equivalent of $600 today. Venue owners overlooked his age because he could hold a room. Before most teenagers faced their first classroom presentation, Keith learned how to manage hecklers under fluorescent bar lights. At 15, he entered the 1983 Toyota Star Maker Quest in Tamworth. Out of 1,200 competitors, Keith won with an original song he had written alone in his bedroom. The prize money, $10,000, went toward a sunburst Fender Stratocaster, the guitar he had dreamed of owning. The win led to a recording contract and major festival bookings. A boy from a town without a music scene was becoming a name. By 21, Keith formed a band in Sydney with drummer Peter O'Keefe. They called it Urban, later renamed The Ranch. From 1988 to 1990, they performed more than 300 live shows, playing 6 nights a week. In 1989, they released a self-produced cassette that sold 5,000 copies without label support. Songs like Never Coming Down built a following, but the momentum was fragile. In January 1989, after a performance at the Tamworth Festival, a promoter refused to pay Keith $800. The argument escalated. A beer bottle was thrown. Police arrested Keith for public intoxication. His mugshot appeared on the front page under the headline, Rising Star Falls from Grace. He spent the night in jail. The fallout cost him an estimated $15,000 in canceled bookings and legal expenses. To recover, he returned to construction work. He later described the incident as the lowest point of his early career. Despite the damage, EMI Australia signed him later that year for $50,000. Keith recorded his debut album at Studios 301 in Sydney, the same studio used by INXS. The lead single, Only You, peaked at number 98 on the ARIA charts. Within 8 months, the album sold 35,000 copies and went gold, earning approximately $125,000 in royalties. EMI followed with a 3-album deal worth $200,000. Keith left construction work behind for good. In 1992, he moved to Nashville with just $300 to his name. He slept on friends' couches, worked as a session guitarist for $50 an hour, and played open mic nights at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. For 18 months, nothing broke through. At one point, he left spare clothes at a friend's house simply to feel like he belonged somewhere. He later called it a slow-motion move. No moment of arrival, just relentless effort. In 1994, he reunited with the idea of The Ranch, this time with Peter Clark and Jerry Flowers. The band signed with Capitol Records and released an album in 1997. It reached number 34 on the Billboard Country chart. Singles like Walk in the Country and Just Some Love drew modest attention, but it was Desiree that caught industry ears. One song from that record, Some Days You Gotta Dance, would later become a massive hit for the Dixie Chicks in 2001, with Keith Urban playing guitar on their version, quietly signaling that his long climb was far from over. But in 1998, the momentum collapsed without warning. During a show in Dallas, Keith Urban overdosed on cocaine. He was rushed into rehabilitation at Cumberland Heights, and the consequences rippled outward immediately. The Ranch disintegrated in the middle of a tour. Festival appearances were quietly pulled. Capitol Records came close to cutting ties altogether. The addiction hadn't appeared overnight. It had been building steadily since the mid-1990s, fed by the relentless pressure to break into American country music and stay there. The crash wiped out the band and nearly ended his career. Years later, Urban would describe this period as the darkest chapter of his life. In 1999, the slow work of rebuilding began. There was no comeback announcement, no grand return. Instead, it started with a phone call. Garth Brooks hired Urban to play lead guitar on Below Wood from the album Sevens. The session paid $20,000, more than the money. It was a signal. Soon after, the Dixie Chicks brought him in to record Sin Wagon. These were quiet moves, largely unnoticed by the public, but inside the industry, they mattered. They reminded people that Urban hadn't lost his edge. Critics took note. His playing was sharp, confident, unmistakably his. Without the spotlight, he worked his way back into the room. Then came the solo breakthrough. Keith Urban's self-titled American debut was released in October 1999. The first 2 singles found modest traction, warming up the charts but stopping short of impact. That changed on February 24, 2001. But For the Grace of God reached number 1 on the country chart, holding the top spot for a full week and eventually selling over 1 million copies. The song was co-written with 2 members of the Go-Go's, an unconventional pairing for country radio, but it worked. By 2003, the album had gone platinum. Urban was named the 2001 CMA Horizon Award winner and top new male vocalist by the Academy of Country Music. The turnaround was undeniable. The child who once practiced 6 hours a day in a town without a single country station had finally arrived. In October 2002, Urban released Golden Road. This time, the impact was immediate. Within days, the album surged to number 2 on the Billboard Country chart. One track in particular, Somebody Like You, dominated country radio for 6 consecutive weeks and crossed over to number 23 on the Billboard Hot 100. Its reach went even further. By the end of 2005, Billboard named it the number 1 country song of the entire decade. The album went triple platinum in the United States alone, surpassing 3 million sales. And it wasn't a one-song moment. 4 singles from Golden Road hit hard. Somebody Like You, Who Wouldn't Want to Be Me, You'll Think of Me, and You'll Think of Me all reached number 1, while Raining on Sunday climbed to number 3. This wasn't just success, it was the beginning of an era. Urban's music began crossing the boundary between country radio and mainstream airwaves. It was also the first time he collaborated with producer Dan Huff, a partnership that would shape much of his sound in the years that followed. Behind the scenes, however, the story was far less stable. As his career surged, Urban's personal life began to fracture. Around the same period, he ended a long and volatile relationship with Laura Sigler, a veterinary technician he had dated intermittently for years. They were engaged in 2001, but by 2002, the relationship had unraveled completely. Rumors circulated, including accusations of infidelity. Sigler later spoke openly, describing how drugs had dragged the relationship into dark territory. She referred to Urban as one of the most painful chapters of her life and claimed his addictive tendencies made lasting happiness difficult. While none of the allegations were formally litigated in public, her words lingered. At the same time, industry insiders whispered about a legal dispute involving a former manager, rumored to involve as much as $500,000. No official details surfaced, but those close to the situation spoke of intense conflicts behind closed doors. Even as Golden Road exploded commercially, selling more than 3.27 million copies across the United States, Canada, and Australia, pressure mounted on all sides. The album went platinum in Australia, double platinum in Canada, and triple platinum in the US. In 2003, Urban stepped onto his first major arena tour. The shift was dramatic. The clubs and bars were gone, replaced by massive stages, sold-out venues, and thousands of faces staring back at him every night. Somebody Like You became his first gold-certified single. You'll Think of Me followed the same path and earned him a Grammy Award for Best Male Country Vocal Performance. Yet long before Golden Road, another moment had quietly shaped Urban's artistic direction. In 1988, back in Australia, he attended a John Mellencamp concert during the Lonesome Jubilee Tour. Urban later described the experience as being struck by lightning. It wasn't imitation, it was understanding. As he put it, he didn't leave thinking he wanted to do that. He left feeling like he finally understood what music could be. From that point on, he began blending country, rock, and storytelling into a sound that felt distinctly his own. Over the years, Urban covered Mellencamp songs like Jack and Diane and Hurts So Good. In 2015, the two shared the stage for a performance of Pink Houses on national television. That same year, Urban released John Cougar, John Deere, John 3 verse 16, a direct tribute to Mellencamp's influence on his life and career. One of Golden Road's standout tracks, Raining on Sunday, carried its own backstory. The song had originally been written and recorded by Radney Foster in 1998, with backing vocals from Darius Rucker. Urban heard the album, told Foster he loved the track, and asked to record his own version. It eventually climbed to number 3 on the charts, becoming one of his most recognizable songs. But during this period of commercial dominance, Urban was also facing profound internal struggles. Beneath the accolades, sales figures, and sold-out arenas, he was wrestling with serious mental health challenges, battles that would soon resurface in ways no one could ignore. There's no interview where Keith Urban directly confirms that the song was written or recorded during a depressive episode. But the timeline tells its own story. In the early 2000s, Urban was navigating the aftermath of substance abuse, emotional fallout from a toxic breakup, and the fragile process of recovery. Against that backdrop, the song's themes, quiet spaces, emotional shelter, and a search for calm, carry a different weight. Heard in context, they feel less like fiction and more like reflection. Just 2 years later, in September 2004, Urban released his 4th studio album, Be Here. From the moment it arrived, it marked a new peak. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Country chart and showed no signs of slowing. It ultimately sold more than 4 million copies, becoming the best-selling album of his career. The lead single, Days Go By, spent 4 weeks at #1 on country radio and crossed over to #31 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was certified gold almost immediately. The album itself went gold, then platinum, all within 6 weeks of release. Urban once again co-produced the record with Dan Huff and took a deeply hands-on role creatively, writing or co-writing 9 of the 13 tracks. The industry responded in kind. Be Here earned him 3 Academy of Country Music Awards, including Male Vocalist of the Year and Album of the Year, both as artist and producer. By every external measure, his career was burning brighter than ever. Then, in 2005, his voice quite literally gave out. Urban developed a large nodule on his vocal cords, described by doctors as a hardened callus formed from years of relentless singing. The condition required emergency laser surgery in Boston, performed by the same specialist who had treated John Mayer. After the procedure, Urban was placed on strict vocal rest for 3 weeks. He wasn't allowed to speak, not even a whisper. He later admitted that he accidentally broke silence a few times during recovery, and the distorted sound that came out terrified him. He became anxious about singing in his sleep, worried it could undo the surgery. At one point, after dreaming that he was performing "You Make Me Feel Like Dancing," he emailed his surgeon in a panic. The surgery held. When Urban returned to the stage at the 2005 Grammy Awards to perform "Making Memories of Us," he described the sensation as feeling like a blocked artery had suddenly been cleared. His voice was back, but the emotional turbulence was not over. Soon after came "Tonight I Wanna Cry." The song climbed to #2 on the country chart and reached #36 on the Hot 100, eventually going platinum. In a candid Rolling Stone interview, Urban revealed that the song came from a raw and painful place. A breakup in 2003 paired with the emotional overload of early sobriety. He recalled a moment when his ex-partner told him, "The novelty of you has worn off." The words devastated him. He said they triggered a downward spiral. More drinking, more drugs. Cocaine and ecstasy returned. Looking back, Urban described much of the late 1990s and early 2000s as a dark blur. Off stage, he felt disconnected and alienated. Drugs became his way of coping with the unforgiving pressure of Nashville and the expectations placed on him. Despite the instability, 2005 was also a year of staggering professional validation. Urban received his first ever CMA nomination for Entertainer of the Year and won on his first try. That same year, You'll Think of Me, originally released on Golden Road, earned him another Grammy Award. Around this period, rumors circulated that he had contributed to demo sessions for Carrie Underwood Jesus, Take the Wheel, though nothing was ever officially confirmed. What is confirmed is the impact of Be Here. The album produced 5 top 5 singles, including 3 #1 hits, Days Go By, Making Memories of Us, and Better Life. 2 additional singles narrowly missed the top spot. The accompanying tour grossed over $20 million from just 39 shows, placing Urban in Billboard's top 25 tours for the first time in 2006. But as the spotlight intensified, his internal struggles returned with force. After marrying Nicole Kidman in June 2006, Urban relapsed during a European tour. The situation deteriorated so quickly that Kidman was forced to stage an intervention. Urban later reflected on the moment with brutal honesty, saying he had caused the implosion of his own marriage before it had even begun. The relationship survived, he said, but only just. The combination of global fame, mounting expectations, and marriage to one of the world's most recognizable actresses pushed him beyond his limits. One can never let one's guard down in recovery, he later admitted. And I'm afraid that I did. That same year, Urban released Love, Pain, and the Whole Crazy Thing. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and sold over 1 million copies. Its breakout single, Stupid Boy, earned him a Grammy Award in 2008. But behind the music, Urban was unraveling again. While recording the album, Kidman was away filming in Rome, leaving Urban alone at their Nashville home. Old patterns resurfaced. On October 19, 2006, Kidman returned home and found drugs in the house. That night, she staged the intervention that would ultimately save his life. Urban checked into the Betty Ford Center the same day, canceling a planned CMA performance and halting all promotional activity for the album. I Told You So emerged as one of the album's most powerful tracks, reaching #2 on the country chart in 2007. Urban co-wrote it during a turbulent period in his marriage and later described that time simply as chaotic. Musically, the album pushed boundaries. Urban and Dan Huff leaned into a more rock-forward sound, incorporating pipes, tin whistles, bouzoukis, and textures rarely heard on country radio. The result was raw, experimental, and emotionally charged. The sessions themselves were tense. Urban, still in recovery, clashed creatively with those around him. During rehearsals for the 2007 tour, he fired his entire band after a series of explosive arguments over arrangements and musical direction. The decision nearly derailed the tour, forcing him to rehire quickly just to keep things moving. One of a Kind, later retitled Once in a Lifetime, debuted at number 17, the highest debut for a country single in Billboard's 62-year history at that time, but stalled at number 6. Urban later revealed that he had written the song for Kidman during a period when she was unsure about marrying him. She once told him, "It's a long shot." The phrase stayed with him. Later that year, Everybody was released as the album's 4th single. It reached number 4 and carried a deeply personal message, a thank you to Kidman and to everyone who had supported him through recovery. For the first time, she joined him on tour. The 2008 tour, with Carrie Underwood as the opening act, became one of the highest-grossing country tours of the year. Years later, on September 10, 2013, Urban released his 8th studio album, Fuse. The record debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Country chart and quickly reached platinum status. But its success came with controversy. What divided fans wasn't the sales, it was the sound. The lead single, Cop Car, barely resembled traditional country music at all. And once again, Keith Urban found himself standing at the center of a genre debate, pushing forward while the ground beneath him shifted. Fuse didn't just bend the rules of country music, it challenged them outright. The album leaned into EDM-style drops, electronic rhythms, and bore the unmistakable imprint of Rick Rubin, the legendary producer best known for his work with Jay-Z and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. For traditionalists, the reaction was swift and unforgiving. But what few listeners realized was that the released tracks were already a compromise. Urban had recorded far more experimental versions, pushing even further beyond genre boundaries before pulling back for the final cut. The intention was unmistakable. He wasn't trying to fit into country music's evolving shape, he was deliberately reshaping it. The tension only intensified the following year. In 2014, Urban collaborated with rising star Kelsea Ballerini on Raise 'Em Up. The song shot to number 1, but its success was quickly overshadowed by speculation. That summer, Australia's Women's Day magazine published photos of Ballerini leaving Urban's tour bus, smiling, relaxed, and unmistakably comfortable. Officially, she was just the opening act. Unofficially, tabloids seized the moment. Stories circulated suggesting late nights, lingering time around his trailer, and an energy that felt, to some observers, too familiar. At the same time, rumors surfaced that Nicole Kidman was growing uneasy. Jealousy had long hovered quietly at the edges of their marriage. Now it was front-page material. Both Urban and Ballerini denied any wrongdoing. Still, denial didn't slow the gossip cycle. Urban's name became entangled in speculation that refused to disappear, adding strain to a marriage already living under intense scrutiny. Then came 2016, and with it Ripcord. Released on May 6th, the album marked the biggest commercial peak of Urban's career. It debuted at number 1, went platinum, and introduced a wave of new ideas. Break on Me was recorded using acoustic loops in his Nashville home studio, giving the song an intimate texture that somehow still connected with a massive audience. Wasted Time went on to win CMA Single of the Year. But it was the live show that truly rewrote expectations. Nathan Barlow introduced the Phantom, a custom-built rig combining 4 iPads and a mixing board, designed to trigger studio samples in real time during performances. For country music, the concept was radical. Audiences weren't just hearing approximations of the records, they were experiencing the actual studio elements, reconstructed live. Urban wasn't simply performing songs anymore. He was engineering an entirely new concert experience. Behind the innovation, however, the pressure was mounting. Just before the Ripcord World Tour began, Urban fired his longtime drummer during rehearsals, reportedly over tempo disputes. Those close to the band weren't shocked. Urban had a reputation for exacting standards. He wanted absolute precision, someone who could handle drums, samples, and keyboard elements simultaneously. That role ultimately went to Barlow. Commercially, the tour was a triumph. The Oceania leg, co-headlined with Carrie Underwood, grossed over $5.7 million across 6 Australian shows. Worldwide, the tour brought in $33.6 million and drew more than 612,000 fans. But the numbers masked a deeper reality. The long rehearsal hours, constant pressure, and rotating band lineup reflected a perfectionism that left little margin for error. In 2017, Urban and Underwood reunited for The Fighter, which quickly climbed to number 1. The song's origins were more personal than most listeners realized. Written with songwriter Busby in London, Urban later said it was inspired by the early fragility of his marriage to Kidman and by their daughter, Faith Margaret, born by a surrogate in 2010. He wanted the song to capture the instinct to stand guard over the people you love. To secure Underwood's vocals, Busby rearranged Urban's entire video shoot schedule to match the only day she was available in St. Louis. The song went triple platinum in the US and quadruple platinum in Australia. When Busby passed away from brain cancer in 2019, The Fighter took on a deeper meaning, no longer just a hit, but a final chapter in a shared creative legacy. Urban's next album, Graffiti You, arrived on April 27, 2018. It debuted strong at number 1 on the country albums chart, selling 137,000 copies in its first week. But the momentum faded quickly. By week 2, it had fallen to number 18 on the Billboard 200, with sales dropping sharply. Female, the album's Me Too-inspired lead single, stalled at number 12, breaking a 2-decade streak of top 10 hits. Never Coming Down fared no better, peaking at number 18. Critics were blunt. Rolling Stone gave the album 2.5 stars, suggesting Urban sounded uncertain while chasing innovation. By July 2019, U.S. sales hovered just above 220,000 copies, barely reaching gold certification. It marked his weakest commercial performance in more than a decade. At home, the strain was becoming impossible to ignore. In interviews, Urban hinted at tension caused by Kidman's demanding filming schedule for Big Little Lies. Friends later confirmed that by mid-2018, the couple had begun living apart. Urban moved into a separate residence. In hindsight, the lyrics of Never Coming Down read less like metaphor and more like confession. When Kidman filed for divorce on September 30, 2025, citing irreconcilable differences, the paperwork pointed back to this exact period. His career and his marriage were unraveling in parallel. Then the world shut down. In 2020, as the pandemic halted touring globally, Urban recorded an entire album from home. The Speed of Now Part 1 was released on September 18th and still managed to debut at number 1 on the country chart and number 7 on the Billboard 200. God Whispered Your Name peaked at number 3 and earned a Grammy nomination. Musicians recorded their parts remotely, with Urban piecing everything together in Nashville. He live-streamed performances, participated in the One World, Together at Home special, and released a cover of Steve Winwood's Higher Love. The album later won highest-selling album at the 2021 Queensland Music Awards. But the financial toll was devastating. His tour was canceled, resulting in losses estimated at $10 million, tickets, production costs, and non-refundable deposits gone overnight. Quietly, Urban returned to online AA meetings, trying to steady himself. His touring operation had to be rebuilt from the ground up through drive-in concerts and virtual shows just to stay afloat. Among country artists, his pandemic-era losses were some of the largest. In 2021, another unexpected collaboration shifted the narrative again. Urban teamed up with Post Malone on One Too Many. The song reached number 1 and surpassed 1 billion streams on Spotify by 2023. Urban later said the decision wasn't driven by ambition, it was driven by isolation. Stuck at home, facing creative blocks and rising personal tension, he simply needed someone to work with. The song was recorded entirely virtually, Malone in Los Angeles, Urban in Nashville. They never met during the process. The lyrics, about drinking alone and emotional distance, hit uncomfortably close to reality, echoing the strain that was once again seeping into his private life. The success forced Keith Urban into a period of reckoning. Once again, longtime country fans accused him of drifting too far from the genre that made him. At the same time, industry voices around him pushed for even deeper collaborations with pop and hip-hop artists. Urban resisted. He had already learned, through experience, that success carried a cost, and that some losses couldn't be repaired by chart positions or streaming numbers. In September 2024, Urban released High. The album debuted at number 14 on the Billboard Country chart. Its standout single, Messed Up As Me reached #1 and went on to surpass 500 million streams. The record featured 12 tracks, including a duet with Lainey Wilson. 4 of the songs were salvaged from an abandoned earlier project known internally as 615. The remaining tracks were what Urban jokingly referred to as cheeseburgers, high-energy, euphoric songs built for release rather than reflection. Critics responded positively, calling High his most personal and stylistically diverse album in years. Behind the music, however, his personal life was unraveling. Nicole Kidman filed for divorce on September 30, 2025. Sources close to the couple later said she had been trying to save the marriage long before the paperwork was filed. They had celebrated their anniversary just 3 months earlier in June. By the end of September, it was over. The marriage had lasted nearly 19 years. Their daughters were 17 and 14. Kidman was granted custody. Urban did not stop touring. The High and Alive World Tour launched 5 days earlier, on September 25, 2025, at the United Center in Chicago. Urban performed for 90 minutes, moving between longtime hits and newer material. The show featured no wedding ring. Industry projections estimated the tour could gross as much as $60 million. He shared the stage with Chase Matthew, Alana Springsteen, and Carly Scott Collins. In interviews, Urban said what mattered most to him was watching audiences forget their stress for a while, to feel present, energized, alive. But fans noticed something else. During the Chicago show, Urban altered the lyrics to The Fighter. The song, originally written for Kidman, now carried a different name in its chorus. He sang Maggie instead. Maggie Baugh was his 25-year-old guitarist. The crowd reacted immediately. Social media followed just as fast. Baugh posted a clip of the moment on Instagram, adding only eye emojis. Her father later told reporters it was purely musical, nothing romantic. Still, the optics lingered. Baugh skipped the next show. Soon after, Urban quietly removed The Fighter from the set list altogether. Even then, the tour continued. In October 2025, Urban appeared on a Nashville radio program and spoke openly about his 14 years of sobriety. He described his daughters as his anchor. He revisited the intervention stage in 2006, shortly after his wedding, when Kidman and close friends confronted him and pushed him toward rehab. He said it saved his life. Through everything, the rise, the collapse, the reinvention, music, he said, remained the one constant that kept him grounded. But by that point, the separation between the man on stage and the life behind the curtain had never felt wider.